So last in this little series, Playing to Win, you see the little spinner up there. It's we took off from the game of life, right? And we said we're not going to talk about the game, we're going to talk about our lives. So in this game of life that we're all in, how do you play to win? That's our focus. And the first week and of course we use these analogies, right? The sports analogies. You got to keep your eye on the baseball, right? If you're going to hit it, you got to keep your eye on Jesus. The moment you take your eye off of Jesus, you're in big troubles, right? The moment you take your eye off the baseball, you ain't going to hit it. So that was the first week. The second week is the mindset, right? How you go after something. And the mindset for us is that we're always on mission. How can we do that? Because God says, you put your mind on the kingdom, and I'll take care of everything else. You don't have to worry about anything. All these things will be added to you as well. Isn't that what Jesus said, right? So that was the focus the second week. And last week, we talked about training smart. And we talked about how different athletes train differently for the sports they play and so forth. And we talk about how we, as Christians living our lives, train. We train giving grace. That's so powerful. Think about how our nation would change if all of us were about giving grace instead of starting fights. Woo-hoo, boy, wouldn't that be cool? Think about how your life would change if you lived that way. Right? So we train ourselves, and the most amazing thing is to have the insight that as we give grace, it more and more settles within us. We more and more understand the grace that God gives us in Jesus. We have that insight, right? And we live our lives not looking backwards. Right, that's what Paul said. I don't look backwards, I look forward. I forget the past. And we talked about how the guilt that we carry is washed clean in the blood of Christ. Oh, and that bitterness that we seem to want to carry with us. You know what I mean? The disappointment and the bitterness that we have sometimes towards God and each other. We forget that. And we press on. Because we're not home yet, but we press on the mission we're a part of. Huh? And everything we do, we build on Jesus Christ and his kingdom. That's how we look to train right. Huh? Today, the last one, the theme is tasting victory. It's a done deal. Would you say that? It's a done deal with me? 1, 2, 3.
It's a done deal.
Yeah, it's a done deal. Say it one more time with me. Ready? It's a done deal. That's what I want you to take home today. Say it one more time. 1, 2, 3.
It's a done deal.
You take that home today, we're good. All right? It's a done deal. Tasting victory, it's a done deal. And we can live in that, see? It all starts, of course, with Jesus. Go ahead, Ben. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I got ahead of myself here. Okay. The sports analogy. All right. The Cubs, they won the World Series last year. Had it been a while since that happened? Yeah. I think it'd been a while. Anyway, you had these huge crowds, right? And you had these signs up there. You see them? I'm a believer. We believe. Hey, we believe it's going to happen. So we're number one, right? Had they won anything yet? Hadn't won, huh? But they were already, you were a Cubs fan, were you, David? Yeah. You were already living in the victory, huh? We're going to win this. I believe it. We've won. We're number one. You see it all the time in crowds, but the Cubs were real believers, the Cub fans, right? Had been a little while, right? It's amazing when teams believe that they're going to win. I mean, really believe it. When you have an undefeated team, they are so hard to beat for the first time. Isn't that, guys, am I right there? In folks who play sports, isn't that right? After they've lost one, they're a lot easier to beat again, right? Because they just don't believe anymore. I mean, they're not quite sure anymore, huh? And if you've ever been on a team that's been undefeated, you really don't think you can lose. And the team can do amazing things. I remember a team I was on, we played in the Rose Bowl. I was in high school. We played in the Rose Bowl, right? And we were behind with a minute and a half to go. And we're 80 yards away. And we just thought we could win. And we drove 80 yards and won. And the other team was better, to be quite honest. How does that happen? Because a team believes. Sometimes a team believes so much that when they lose, it's like they're in shock. That happened to us too. Last game of the season, 3-yard line. We're going to blast in and win. And we didn't. I'll never forget the look on the guys' faces, even after the game. It was like they'd been through a car accident. They were just in shock. They couldn't believe it. We were so locked into believing it. You can believe the victory that you already have in Jesus Christ. And you can live tasting the victory. Most guys that have played on a football team knows that the day before the game, a coach runs something, so most of the time called polish, and the offense comes out, and they run against nobody, and they go 10 yards at a crack, right? I remember I had this one coach that when you scored, you better celebrate. Wait a minute, you didn't run it against anybody. Why do you celebrate? Because he wanted you to live in that celebration. Anybody else had that experience? I don't know. But it was this idea that he wanted you to get the idea that you've already won. We even celebrated like after the game, before the game started. Yeah, really, the guy was nuts. He said, "I want you to celebrate like you've already won, man." Yeah. We already have won. That's the point. And it does start with Jesus. Here we go. I got ahead of myself. 2,000 years ago, a man named Jesus went the way of the cross, and he beat death once and for all, and he rose again on Easter morning. The whole story of the Bible is about this God who comes to rescue us and give us victory that we couldn't have ourselves. You know, way back in Genesis, God creates Adam and Eve to have life the way it was meant to be, in relationship with him and with one another, right? And what sin did is they walked away from that life with God, and it destroyed their relationship with one another, right? This woman that you gave me, huh? Does that sound familiar at all in your life? That's what sin does. It isolates us. And we can't fix it ourselves. God, way back in Genesis, said there's going to come somebody, a seed of the woman, who is going to crush the head of the serpent. Now that sounds like a pretty resounding victory, doesn't it? Crushing somebody's head. That's where it happened. God stepped into time in the person of his son, Jesus Christ. And he crushed the power of Satan there, right there. And he comes to us, and his Spirit touches our hearts every single time we talk about it, every time we remember it. Right now, his Spirit is touching your heart with this reality. The reality that God has come to you and the victory is won. He said on the cross, "It is finished, done, taken care of." And the exclamation point is the empty tomb. You know anybody else that rose from the dead? Called his shot. 3 days from now, I'm going to rise from the dead. And then did it? Right now, God's Spirit is touching your heart. Maybe for the first time. You know that light going on? Oh, I get it, man. Maybe to renew you in that light. And maybe to grow you in that light. But you already have the victory. It is a done deal in Jesus Christ. You are God's very own child, and he will never run away from that. You could always run away from him, but he will never run away from you. It's taken care of. No matter what disappointment you bring, no matter what bitterness you bring, no matter what guilt you bring with you, it's washed clean in the blood of Christ. No matter where you need a brand new beginning, no matter where you need a little light in the darkness, no darkness can overcome the light of Jesus Christ. He's there for you. It's a done deal. You have won in Jesus. Today, with these readings, we're just going to talk about what that means and what that looks like to live in that victory, tasting that victory. First, let's read this real quick. Let's read it together. Ready? You got to go back. Boom, boom. Okay, here we go. 1, 2, 3. Playing to win is every day tasting the victory, living in the victory, because it's already a done deal. What is it?
Done deal.
A done deal, huh? That's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to start with this gospel lesson for the Transfiguration. Go ahead, Bev. Jesus takes Peter, James, and John. He goes up on this high mountain, it says, and there he's transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun. Now, you've probably heard this story before, but have you ever stopped to think about when this happened? Peter, Jesus has just asked the disciples, who do you say that I am? And Peter says, you're the Christ, the Son of God, right? And then Jesus tells them what that means. That he's going to go the way of the cross. He's going to be whipped and beaten, and the power's going to turn their backs on him, and these horrible things are going to happen. Peter has pulled him aside, right, and said, hey, man, what are you talking about? We don't want that, right? And Jesus says to him, get behind me, Satan, right? So they know they're going to go through some hard stuff, right? And by the way, just a little while after this happens, Jesus goes the way of the cross. So just before they go through that hard stuff, Jesus takes Peter, James, and John with him, and he goes up to the mountain and he shows them his glory. And not only that, there's two other folks there, Moses and Elijah. Now we might have struggle. What were these dudes doing there, right? To the Jewish mind, these folks represented the whole Old Testament. Moses wrote the first 5 books, and the prophets, symbolized by Elijah, wrote the rest of them. And so these Jews who lived in a time when they were looking so desperately for the Savior, for the Messiah, they understood that it all coalesced in this one whose glory was shown before them. There must have been a moment of peace, huh? Peter says, let's just stay here. I got this great idea, Lord. Let's build 3, and the Greek word is actually tabernacles. It reminds you of the Old Testament when God dwelled with his people, right? Let's build 3 tabernacles for us, and let's just stay here. Let's just, let us see your face and rest in your peace. Let's just stay here. You ever feel that way? The voice of the Father came, and there's a great light in the voice of the Father. This is what he said, Bev. He says, this is my Son whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. Peter, I understand your heart. But he's the one that you got to follow and listen to. And the disciples were so afraid. The 3 disciples were so afraid. It says they were just freaking, right? And it says that Jesus actually touched them. You can go back and read the text if you want to, but that's really what it says. It says that Jesus touched them. You've been touched by Jesus, you know. He actually touched them. And he said, get up. We're not staying here, guys. There'll be a time when we're face to face, resting in my peace. Now's not the time. Get up. Don't be afraid. And they went down the mountain. Think about what this meant to them. Now, I know that they all ran away from Jesus when the cross came about and so forth, but all but one of them somehow held on to their faith, right? And Peter and John, when they ran to the tomb, the light went on with John. Oh, he's risen. I think part of that is in the back of their minds, they remembered this. The glory of Christ revealed to them. And certainly afterwards, they took it with them. James remembered it when he was the first disciple to die for the faith. He was skinned alive. Peter remembered it when he was hung upside down. John remembered it when he was the only one living, and I bet he wished he wasn't, you know? This was to empower them in very hard times, in shadows, that they might remember that they walked in this glory and Christ is with them. But this reading ends with this verse. Here we go. Don't tell anyone what you have seen. This is Jesus talking. Until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. Has that ever bothered you about that text? I mean, have you ever struggled with that? You know, I think I finally get it. Yeah. We think that the transfiguration was for Peter, James, and John. And it was. But it was especially for you. For us who live after the resurrection of Jesus Christ. For us who live in this time between the first coming of Jesus and when he comes in all of his glory. For us who live during this time when we know the victory is certain and that we can taste it. And yet we have to come down off the mountain. And we have to walk with Jesus in mission. And sometimes the shadows are long and the struggles are deep. We live in this time after the resurrection. And this picture was given to us to take with us. To know that we've won already. It's a done deal, right? And to empower us to live in it now. Not yet, it's coming, but it's also now. In this short time before Jesus comes. This is really how Peter saw it. Peter, in one of his epistles, wrote this. He wrote this: "We did not follow cleverly invented stories when we told you about the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ." Now, most of the time when you read this, you think, okay, well, Peter is talking about Jesus, and he's talking about when he came and he preached and he healed and he kicked out demons and he raised from the dead and he suffered and died and he rose again. That's what Peter's saying, right? No, it's not. The Greek word here for power, dunamis, it means dynamite, right? The explosive power of God, okay? It's tied with the word coming, with the word parousia. It's a technical word that points to Jesus' second coming. Peter here is talking to these Christians that are struggling, right? They're being persecuted. They're losing their lives for the faith. Things are tough, right? And he says, we didn't tell you stories when you told you that Jesus is coming again in all of his glory. He's coming with the power of dynamite. He's going to do his thing. The kingdom is yours, and he's coming back. And he tied this proclamation with the transfiguration. Go ahead, Bev. But we were eyewitnesses of what? When did that happen? Go ahead, Bev. For he received honor and glory from God the Father when the voice came to him from the majestic glory, saying, "This is my Son whom I love. With him I am well pleased." And in case you have any question about what he's talking about, go ahead. We ourselves heard this voice when we were with him where? On the sacred mountain, right? He ties the reality of the next page in salvation history when Jesus Christ comes in all of his glory. He ties it to the sacred mountain, to the glory revealed in the face of Christ. He's saying this is what you can live in right now. This is the victory that is yours. You can live tasting it. It's a done deal. And then he points yet again, go ahead, Bev, towards this. And we have the words of the prophets made more certain, and you will do well to pay attention to it. Read the underlined part with me. As to a light shining in a dark place until the day dawns and the morning star rises in your hearts. he springboards then from the second coming of Christ in all of his glory to the Mount of Transfiguration to this living word of Christ that is ours. And he says, as you look at the glory of Christ, and remember, he's coming. He says, this word I've given you is as real as that living, breathing Christ in your life. I don't know if any of you are Lord of the Rings fans. Okay, I happen to kind of like it. Towards the end of it, there's Frodo, right? He gets caught in a giant spider. I think her name is Shelob. Is that right? Shelob's lair, right? And it's dark and it's dank and there's dead things in there and he's kind of caught in the web. I mean, it's a bad news bear thing, right? But Galadriel, one of the elven princesses, right? She gave him this little vial and she says, "This is the light of Galadriel, light of our brightest star," she says, "for you in dark places when all lights go out," right? And so he, in the darkest of moments, he takes this vial and he holds it up and it shines so bright that the spider goes, "Ah!" and runs away, right? And he gets out of it, right? Have you ever thought of God's witness to you in his word in that way? That points towards the word made flesh, about which it says in John, no darkness can overcome his light. This light revealed on the Mount of Transfiguration so that you can hear the victory, remember the victory, and see the victory, and live your life tasting the victory. Romans fleshes this out for us. It says this, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. Now, some Christians look at this. I have no reason how they get, I don't know why they get this, but they say, oh, well, this is only for those who really love him, right? And no, that's the wrong answer, right? It's those who love him, and then that is kind of defined. It says, who are called according to his purpose. Have you been called by the good news of Jesus Christ to believe in Jesus? Have you been called? Do you believe in Jesus? It's talking about you. See? It's defining you. And what it's saying there is, we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him. Boy, we really want to argue with that one, right? And sometimes what we read into it is, well, all this crappy stuff, it all comes from God, right? He must want me to go through this. No. It comes from the evil one. It comes from the sin that infests us, right? But the reality of God, the reality of this King of Kings and Lord of Lords, who will one day burst through the clouds and make everything right. The reality is that in his power, he can take all this gunk and he can somehow weave it for our good. That's what James would tell you, who was skinned alive. That's what Peter would tell you, who was crucified upside down. That's what John would tell you, who was put out on a rocky island to die. That somehow God was able to turn this evil into their good. Greatest reality of that is the cross. Greatest evil that ever happened. The Son of God crucified. He turns that to our greatest good. We can live tasting this victory. It's a done deal. That's why in these words from Romans, it has words like this. Those he called. Now tell me that word called. Is that present tense or past tense? Past tense, already done, right? Those he called, he justified. Present tense or past tense? Past, done deal, huh? Took care of it on the cross. It's a done deal. I mean, God doesn't know what I did. Doesn't matter. It's a done deal. What he did on the cross is enough. Taken care of. And those whom he justified, he also glorified. Present tense? Ongoing tense? What is it? Past tense is a done deal. It's a done deal. you can live tasting the victory, because even you being glorified is already a done deal in Jesus. It's now, and certainly when he comes, we'll see it completely. And yet right now, it's a done deal. So that this is always true. Nothing can separate us from his love. Playing to win is living our lives in this victory we can taste, knowing that it's a done deal. We believe, and not because our team is so good, but because Jesus Christ is Lord. It's a done deal. You can taste the victory, and you can live in it every day. Amen. Now may the peace of God which passes all understanding keep your hearts and minds in true faith to life never ending. Amen.